People who have taken an ancestry DNA test and accidentally uncovered a family secret. What was it? My bio dad left his family and 2 daughters in Washington and married my mom in Los Angeles 5 weeks later. I found his first marriage certificate but nothing about a divorce. I'm pretty sure he was a bigamist. Not my story. But someone very close to me discovered that none of the ethnic background that they were expecting was present in the results. This person, whose father was deceased at the time, questioned their mother. The mother admitted that the person's father was not biological as they believed their entire life. They were older than 40. The mother gave the name of the biological father. My friend then found the biological father, contacted him, and then discovered that they had several 1/2 siblings. The biological father was unaware he had another child and accepted my friend into his family as did the siblings. I found out that my dad is not my biological father. Turns out the family friend I grew up calling us a grandpa is. Oh yay. And he was also my mom's bariatric surgeon. Felt weird, man. Dang. He was supposed to make her belly smaller. Made it bigger instead. I have an uncle that was put up for adoption. He contacted my grandma and she thought he was going to extort her. They're well off. Turns out he's a multi-millionaire on his own. They still have limited contact, though my dad has reached out and formed a relationship. Apparently they look exactly alike and have the same personality, which sounds kind of stupid now that I'm writing it out. But they're only half siblings. My wife is adopted, but found her bio mom and did one of the genetic tests. Someone matched with her and asked if she knew such and such a name. She found out her bio mom's husband wasn't the bio dad. It was the bio mom's boss. Oops. A woman over in Chicago decided to find out who her real parents were. She was getting close to 60 and realized that there may not be much time left to find her father. So through the magic of ancestry she was matched to my grandfather. She reached out to him and told him who her mother was. He didn't recognize the name but dug up his little black book and lo and behold, there she was. So now I've got a new aunt. My male cousin did one and found a female cousin we did not know about. He reached out to her and apparently our deceased uncle was good friends with her mother. Mom wanted a baby so uncle got her pregnant simply as a sperm donor. Female cousin lived a few blocks away from my grandmother. He had met her a few times going around selling Girl Scout cookies or something. My grandmother had no idea that she was buying cookies from her granddaughter. Found out I have a different father. My dad also took a DNA test at the same time and found out his father, of 52 years, was not his biological father either. As it turns out, I come from a line of bastards. On the flip side, my dad used to say my mom slept around and none of the 3 of us were his kids. Well, thanks to the test, we know all 3 of us are. Oof. Sounds like your dad is just a dick. I found a half sister that none of my siblings or mother knew about. My dad had an affair 50 years ago. He's dead now. For us it wasn't really a surprise. We already have a half sister from another affair, but for the newly discovered one it answered a lot of questions and gave her some needed closure. We all met a few times. It was pleasant. My real father and 3 half siblings also, it ended up being a really good discovery. Not me, but a friend never knew who his father was. Mom had a weekend fling in college and never contacted the guy after, and his wife helped him use Ancestry.com to try and track him down. My friend reached out and the guy was obviously surprised, but flew across the country to meet him. They have a great relationship now. The dad attended his wedding. A friend discovered that her father was not really her father. Her mom had an affair and she was the result. It tore her family apart. Her father did not know he was not really her father. Note: she was 45 years old when this happened. Not me, but a family friend. He did the test and found out he had a half brother. Turns out his dad had an affair a while back, and that kid was a product of that affair. A full 100% older brother. My mother got pregnant by my father before they were married. Scandalous in 1960. So, with my father's knowledge of the situation, Mom left town and lived with my aunt until the birth. Mom gave the baby up for adoption and then returned home. A couple years later, she married my dad and had 3 more children together, including me. 55 years later, after both my parents had died, my aunt let it slip that me and my siblings that were not the only children of our parents. To paraphrase from Star Wars, there is another. My sister took a DNA test, and a couple of years later she got a hit. Soon thereafter, we met our new big brother and his family, wife, kids, and have become quite close. My dad has a cousin living in Utah. The family has always lived in Pennsylvania. For the timing to work, his grandfather hooked up prior to coming to the US in 1918, or his grandmother had a kid and gave it up when she was like 14. Either way, that kid would have been my dad's aunt uncle, which we never knew about. My cousin took a test and goes on and on about how she's almost completely Irish. Our grandpa was German. I'd heard from my mom as a kid that my aunt's biological father was probably her friend's father. I've looked the family up on Facebook and my aunt looks just that friend. My cousin seems to have no idea of any of this. I don't think my aunt does either. My ex-husband's family were proud of their Dutch heritage and claimed to be one of the founding families of the historically Dutch Holland. MI. His ancestry results didn't show any Dutch ancestry. Instead, he had primarily English-Irish ancestry. My son is my 4th cousin. We adopted him as an infant from an agency. Fun to find that we are actually related. That my father is a registered sex offender. Parents are divorced. I want to upvote you, but that feels wrong, so here's an award. My dad and aunt found out they had an older brother. Long story. My grandfather had a fling before he met my grandmother. Never even knew he had a son. Went and lived his life, and some near 60 years later, boom. Ancestry test. Here you go. So another really good story from this one. Always thought my grandfather on my father's side was adopted and thought our last name was just of the family that adopted him. One DNA test later and the family figures out that my great-grandparents got pregnant out of marriage and ran away. They came back with a child saying it was adopted so they wouldn't be shamed for him. That my grandmother was biracial. She was abandoned shortly after birth at a church by an older white lady. Adopted by a white farmer with 11 kids. Stopped talking to most of that family due to nondescript unpleasantness as an older teen. She died 20 years before I was born and looks like Maya Rudolph in the few photos I've seen, but insisted she was part Sicilian. My father and his brother both look more white than not. My father worshipped the ground she walked on and never questioned her ancestry. My uncle was always pretty sure she was black and argued with her a lot. Both dad and uncle ended up being super active in the civil rights movement and still are devoted to anti-racism work nearly 60 years on. Which largely stemmed from these discussions growing up. Anyway, my mom, divorced from my dad, got me a DNA test a few years ago. My grandmother was definitely half black. I have no Sicilian or Italian DNA. I've connected with a few black distant cousins over email and Zoom. I'm waiting for the pandemic to mostly end to talk to my dad about it and introduce him to more family. I exported my raw DNA from 23andMe and threw it through Prometheus to find out why I have porphyria, which is supposed to be hereditary. My mom and dad are definitely my mom and dad, but neither of them have this, which means it was environmental exposure that caused it. Discovered a rare AMPD enzyme deficiency in mom. Found out dad carried a recessive lupus gene and gave it to my sister. DNA is wild. I knew about being conceived using art, but I didn't know about the Duggarish number of half-siblings I had from the same sperm donor. Frankly, it blindsided my parents too. Not me, but a friend. My friend, 34F decided to get her twin sister and parents a DNA testing kit for Christmas. When her parents opened the gift, they looked at each other and said, "Oh, thanks." They quickly tried to move on to other presents. My friend was slightly confused, but dropped it. Later they went for their Christmas Day walk. The mom and sister were walking ahead while she walked with her dad. Her dad spilled the beans. Her and her sister were adopted. The mother looked back and started crying. She couldn't believe her husband told her daughter without them talking about it first. They were going to keep it a secret forever. She had never suspected she or her sister were adopted because they look a lot like their parents. They are also very short, as are their parents. Whoops. I took a DNA test and found I am ethnically 25% Ashkenazi. After 8 months of serious digging, I found out my grandpa, my father's dad, is not my father's biological father. Also, I have since came into contact with my half-uncle. He's super nice and I enjoy chatting with him. I love learning about my bio-grandpa and the rest of the family. We haven't told them and don't plan on it. I have a small family, so it was such a great comfort to connect with more family. Understand my lineage and the history of my Jewish ancestors. My Phil found out he's the milkman's son, so to speak, and everyone else including his sister knew. It explained why they treat his wife and kids like black sheep. My great-gran, who I knew, was an orphaned live-in servant in Greenock, Scotland in 1900. Got pregnant by her employer. Kicked out. Ended up in the poorhouse where she abandoned the baby. DNA turned up the granddaughter of the baby. Met her in Glasgow a couple of years ago. She turned up as a cousin via DNA. This one is a doozy. Some guy in Texas took a DNA test. My grandma took a DNA test a year earlier, in Utah. Found out they were siblings. Same father. They have met and are literally best friends. Talk on the phone daily and send each other care packages in the mail. It's nuts. My wife no longer knows who her father is. We are about to approach her mom about this. But that's a delicate relationship balance to approach due to her mom being very straight-laced and proper. It's shook my wife 45F entire foundation. She was from 6 generations of Texans. Now she is lost. I don't know how to help her. She is not real interested in finding out who her real father is yet. She is also relieved because the man she thought was her father is a weird asshole. I wish her dad, her mom's current husband of 40 years, was her real dad. Though he did legally adopt her years ago when the guy she thought was her dad abandoned her. It's mess. Hard pass on the DNA tests for me. I'm good being just 90% FK'd up. My deeply racist backwoods Mississippi family had an African in it 6 generations ago. My grandma is about 5% African. Similarly, my anti-Semitic Phil found out he was 2% Ashkenazi Jewish. It's provided my husband with near endless hazing material. My personal favorite was from Christmas. Syl found out at her latest ultrasound that she is having a boy. Not another girl as they'd initially thought. This will be the first male grandkid. Syl. With the boy it's just going to be so different. With number 1 I didn't have to think about circumcision or anything like that. Phil. Well, he has to be circumcised. That isn't even a question. Husband. Geez, dad. We know you're Jewish, but no need to push your beliefs on us like that. Phil. I found out I'm a little Jewish, which prompted my cousin to dig deeper. And we found out we were expelled into Italy during the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. A long lost relative contacted me. He is the same age as my dad and looked straight up related. He was adopted and wanted to connect with his birth family. Long story short, I found out that my grandfather had an affair with my great aunt and they put the baby up for adoption. My great aunt went away while she was pregnant and came back with no baby. It was the 60s. The family was freaking out about it, trying to keep it all hush hush. I felt bad for the guy, so I did my best to help him out. So technically, he's my uncle cousin. And we live in Kentucky. Which makes it even funnier. A colleague of mine found out that she was dating her cousin when she was in HS. My sister is almost half Hispanic, no traces of my father's DNA. And I'm 1% Ashkenazi Jewish. None of these fit with the DNA tests they took the previous year. My paternal grandfather was 50/50 African and American Seminole Indian. Awesome. Not me. But an elderly customer at work the other day. She came down with some serious illness and the doctor had her take a DNA test to see if it was hereditary. Turns out it was from her father's side. But not the man who raised her. So she went hunting to find her real father. Turns out that he was a Korean War vet. Took part in Chosin Reservoir and loads of other things. 2 years after she found him and all of her half-siblings, he passed. Genetic genealogist here. I have handled both volunteer cases and paid cases. The most shocking case I have seen was a person whose DNA led to his mother's admission that she was RP'd by her older brother. Very difficult situation for the family all around. The person who came to me ended up discovering their uncle was also their father. I now warn clients. DNA can solve your cases. But they can also uncover difficult family secrets. So really think through the possibilities first. Not me. But my brother-in-law. Put my nephew's test results on Ancestry and got a match that someone nearby had a genetic match. His dad was something of a womanizer, so he figured maybe his dad had had a kid in a nearby city on the down low back in the day. Contacts the person. Turns out it's a woman he knows because my nephew has been in a class with this woman's son. He tries to be gentle in asking about her family. She tells him straight up, "Oh, I'm the product of a one-night stand. His name was my dad's name." My bill is like, "That's my wife, father." Turns out my dad had hooked up with her mom once while on a brief return from being overseas in the Marines. Her mom got pregnant and married another guy who was happy to raise her as his own. My dad never saw the woman again. Funnily enough, he also got another woman pregnant within a few weeks and married that woman. My oldest sisters are only about 5 weeks apart but didn't know of each other until they were in their 50s. I found out the person who I thought was my father was not. This is something I long suspected. Which is why I took the test. I exchanged messages with my newly discovered uncle or half-sibling for a while. I was unable to determine our exact relation. They didn't want to pursue a relationship and didn't pass my information on. So the mystery of who my father is ended there. I did a bit of Facebook stalking and found probable suspects, but I never reached out. On the plus side, even though the person who I believed to be my father was not, I grew a new appreciation for him. He was a terrible father, but treated me the same as his bio kids. My friend was adopted through a closed private adoption. Her adopted parents got her an ancestry test for Christmas a few years ago. She matched with her birth mom and half-sister, then made contact through Facebook. After trying to get basic family info and medical history, my friend has lots of health problems including cancer. It became clear that her birth mom was keeping secrets. Another friend of my friend did some searching online and found the birth dad and made contact against my friend's wishes. Turns out the birth mom had slept with her brother-in-law and gotten pregnant. My friend was given up for adoption to hide the secret. It caused some scandal in their family and my friend no longer talks to them. She did meet her birth dad and he was a nice guy. Turns out he and his wife wanted to keep my friend, but the mother didn't give him a choice. My grandma found out her 2 sisters are actually only half-sisters. After some snooping, she comes to find out that her real dad was the guy who owned the corner store where her mom worked growing up. My mother's husband. Father of my siblings, both younger and older. The man I call dad since birth. Is not genetically related to me. Oops. I, 34, found out that my dad, 78, is not my biological father. He learned that I was awaiting results of the test, which was an innocent birthday gift from my wife, and broke the news to me over a beer in an awkwardly crowded bar, about a week before quarantine started. My parents used a donor that was selected from a local medical school by their fertility doctor. The only basis seeming to be that this student looked like my parents. I haven't been able to find any useful leads on who my biological father might be. Just distant family relations. My great-grandfather thought that he was the only member of his family to survive the Holocaust. He wrote to one of his brothers trying to convince him to move to America. But his brother wanted to stay back in their small Polish village. He eventually stopped receiving letters and he assumed his brother and family had died. We found that he moved to Brazil. And we got in touch with his great-grandchildren. We also found out we are related to Albert Einstein. I'm actually afraid to do this testing research. As a product of RPA, I knew my birth mother, but finding biological relatives on his side might not be so enjoyable. I was hoping to find something cool. My dad's family is from Sicily, and so we thought we could have Greek, Asian, African. Nope. 96% Italian on one side. 98% Italian on the other side. The other percentage being some kind of non-specific Middle Eastern.